Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. I'm Amelia Fruby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio and the host of this here podcast, where we explore ways to grow or start your business with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. If you're brand new around here, I want to invite you to download the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit. It includes the 3 tools that I use to leave social media and launch a business without it, including my very popular list of 100 ways to share your work without social media. You can get that for free at offthegrid.fun/toolkit or at the link in the show notes. Today on the show, we are returning to one of the conversational threads that we have had going throughout season 3. In fact, we kicked off season 3 talking about this topic. And that topic, my friends, is money. So because I heard from so many of you that you could use more support, rewriting your money stories, unpacking your money backgrounds, and being more intentional about your spending, being more expansive about your earning, all of these things. Because I got so many requests for that, I have invited a guest on today to give us all a little more support. And let me tell you about her. Rachel Duncan is a financial therapist, certified in trauma of money, and an art therapist. She runs a company called the Money Healing Club, and her small group money coaching program called the Healing Circle takes a trauma-informed, mindful, and creative approach to money management. Her work has been featured in Bankrate and FinCon 2023. And besides hosting unique emotional money conversations, which she's here to do today, she also loves to sing for her cats, children, and other audiences in Denver, Colorado. Welcome, Rachel. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Amelia. It's so great to be here.
We got connected through a friend of mine, shout out to Stephanie, who heard the Overcoming Under-Earning episode and basically went and did a whole bunch of her own research and was like, do you know who this person is? It seems like she might help. And I was like, I don't know, but I will know her soon. And hence, you're here. I'm so thrilled to learn about your work and get to know you better. What struck me the most is that you are a financial therapist and an art therapist. And I find that that feels very like left brain meets right brain to me. It feels like the perfect mix of that like creative spirit with that structural thinker that we need to run our businesses. And so I'm curious if you could take us in by just talking a little bit about how money meets creativity in your background, in your work, or even more broadly.
You know, it's so funny, even though this really is my niche, I still need to practice articulating it because as we get into it and every person has their own process, I just learn more and more. So yeah, I was one of those kids where I was really encouraged to be well-rounded. And I was well-rounded. Like I really enjoyed art class and I really did well in math and I tried to do well in everything. And so I've always had like a very strong right brain, left brain thing going on and kind of like couldn't find my camp in either one and ended up getting a liberal arts degree, you know, all of that. Oh, be well-rounded, and kind of never really niched down or followed one specific interest. But I think when it comes down to it, I love the literal act of creating, like working with my hands, like manifesting something that didn't exist before, and also making the vague concrete, like making the abstract real, making the implicit explicit is like the fanciest word, but like that is what makes sense to me. And actually that's sort of what therapy is. So when I ended up going to graduate school for therapy, I was like, oh, this is taking this sort of sense you have, this like little felt sense, and putting words to it and putting images to it. And so my degree was integrated with mental health therapy and art therapy. So art making image response was integrated into all of our training with mental health. And if you ever meet an art therapist, what's kind of cool is it's not only that there's mental health training, but it's that we sit with our client as an artist ourselves. And we tend to be a pretty sensitive bunch, like really, oh, when this topic came up, like, oh, I just felt purple. And what is that about? And I'm having this own internal process, even if in the session we don't make art. Like art therapy isn't just about making art. It's also the art therapist is experiencing the client from the perspective of an artist. So I found all that really compelling and really natural for me. I didn't realize I was such a visual thinker, but like that just sort of made a lot of sense to me. At the same time, I'm not a very typical art therapist. Like, I'm like, well, what's the profit margin? Like, how are you getting your paperwork done? And I enjoy the business side of things and the tactical side of things. And I find doing my own bookkeeping an act of creativity. Like, I love checking boxes and seeing graphs, and it just all sort of makes sense to me. Like, I don't find it that disparate, but I can understand how, like, for most folks it is. So when I learned that financial therapy is even a thing about 3 or 4 years ago, it was like I was handed a permission slip to integrate these things that I had to keep really separate. So that is how financial therapy and art therapy came to be for me. And actually didn't seem like such a stretch. It seemed like, oh, that's kind of what I've always been doing.
You really just blew my mind in how you connected all of that together, because I've never thought of how art making is molding the raw material of creativity or source, depending on how you think of it. And then therapy is like molding and rearticulating the raw material of our emotions and experiences. And then even working in our businesses can be molding the raw material of material, like the numbers or of the things we're creating. And I had not connected all three of those as a way of, as you put it, kind of connecting these more like abstract things and articulating them so we can like say them and share them. And again, that's just kind of blowing my mind right now.
Oh, I'm so glad. And isn't it true for all business owners? It's like, okay, we're taking a difficult topic, a thing that someone doesn't have a solution for because it feels, scary or overwhelming, or they have a problem they can't solve. And we're taking that abstraction and in our own way saying, here's a solution. Like it is the act of making something clear and concrete. That is what we do as business owners.
It's really reminding me of the tarot card, the Magician. Tarot is a big part of my personal practice. And I'm just thinking about how in that card, you have this figure who is like, has a wand at the sky and a hand pointing to the ground. And they're like drawing down this sort of like divine inspiration of some kind. But I'm like, oh, it's like with our art, we draw it down from the sky. And with our therapy, we draw it out from within ourselves. And with our businesses, we draw it out from the world around us. But it's all about like making it concrete, making it real, making it understandable and clear to other people. And that just is magic to me. I mean, that's how I think about it.
It is. It's magic. I think that what we do, especially when we're creating something new, it's magic and it's so human. It's so deeply human to do that. I mean, I was also a religion major. So there's something about like, what is this human experience? What is this thing that I can taste, but I can't quite articulate? And then someone says it and you're like, that's it, right? That's poetry. That is scripture. That is whatever you want to call it. It's like when someone else can put it into words or image or an experience that like, oh, I hear that. I taste that. I see that. And that's that thing I haven't been able to articulate, and someone else sometimes does it for us. That's the role of the artist. And then a therapist has the same thing. The therapist is only reflecting you back to you. But because they're saying it, because it's real, it's happening with a real person, oh, it's suddenly very real. My experience is actually feeling much more real instead of like this sort of vague notion, in my head or in my heart or wherever it feels like it is, sometimes outside of our body, but this person is making it feel real for me.
And that to me is like the experience of resonance, which we talked about on a recent episode with Jaya Kunzo, and also which is, a concept related to sound that I approach in my podcast editing work, just the way that we can quite literally and more magically get on the same frequency or share something that has literally the same vibration as what someone else is experiencing. And I just love already where this conversation is going. And I want to now sprinkle in some more money. So I feel like we're talking about the art therapy side, or like we're really in it together there. But can you tell me about financial therapy? Because I don't really know what it is or how it works. And I'd love to kind of get the 101 from you. Like, what is financial therapy and what do you do as a financial therapist?
Totally fair question. And that's actually what I try to do, is bridging this like ephemeral with the practical, because that's how I live. That's where I'm at. And so I try to bring that to my clients. So yeah, financial therapy is a relatively new field. It's pretty small also. The Financial Therapy Association has been around, I want to say around 20 years, I think. And when someone says they're a financial therapist, it means that they have a professional higher degree in either finance related stuff or mental health and have done some cross training. So I recommend folks check out the Financial Therapy Association. They have a listing, but know that you're going to get a range of finance people who've learned a little bit of counseling skills or counselors who've learned some finance skills. So knowing just sort of where people are coming from is important. So obviously I come from the mental health background. There are fewer of us. There are more people on the finance side who really recognize that behavioral finance and stuff like that is really important. So because it's sort of an infant field, I think it's finding its way. There are some certificates and things like that. But I will say at this point, because there's so few of us, I think we're all finding our own way. Every financial therapist is going to have their own flavor. How I approach it is not necessarily how a different financial therapist would approach it. We all have our niches. But I would say, because I know a lot of the financial therapists who come from the mental health side, we're really bringing our therapy skills into a money conversation, just as any therapist who niches into a topic or population. A sex therapist, a trauma therapist is like, okay, this topic I know a lot about. I can hold space about that and guide people in this very tricky topic. So that's sort of the analogous thing. So my clients are therapy people. They love their therapy. So what's really great is if someone's in therapy to maybe treat depression, anxiety, trauma, whatever that is, and money has come up in a way that the therapist can't quite go with them, because a lot of therapists haven't done their own money work. That's another thing. You only go as far in therapy as your therapist has gone themselves. So often I come in for a 8-session intensive to kind of help forward the growth by bringing in the money stuff. So that's sort of what I've ended up doing here in Colorado. I also started the Money Healing Club to just be able to reach a wider audience in a coaching and education model. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying, it's a profession that is really finding itself. I think you're going to hear more and more about it. There's been a lot of recent press. That's how I heard about it. I think there was a New York Times article. So there is this A, I've never heard of that before, and B, that completely makes sense. Because of, also just what we're seeing in the economy with such a disparate spread of wealth. While there is a lot of financial information and access out there that didn't exist for our parents' generation, there still isn't a way for the majority of people to kind of sit with money and learn about money. And it is fraught with systemic trauma. So of course, when someone wants to avoid money, and I know you really unpacked that in that episode, when we avoid things, it's okay, this isn't an information issue. This is a relational thing. So for myself and other financial therapists who come from the mental health world, is really, really see the systemic trauma going on and really try to help heal that so that we can approach this topic and use all of our intelligences to get around this big money topic.
That last piece was actually really helpful for me, because I think that often when we're struggling with money, what is available to us most readily would be like financial literacy. That's the information problem you're mentioning. Like maybe I just don't know enough about money and that's why it's not working for me. I don't know what stocks are. I've never bought a bond. I don't have a loan or a mortgage. Like there are informational deficits, certainly, and financial literacy can help us with that. But as you said, if you find yourself avoiding money, or for me, also very anxiously attached to money. I mean, at the peak of some of my struggles, I was checking my bank balance over a dozen times a day. Nothing was happening in my bank account, but I was really struggling with just believing the money was there or noticing there wasn't enough money there, like all these things that were spiraling and spinning in my mind. Financial literacy can't help me with that. That's a relational issue, as you said. And so that I'm hearing is where financial therapy comes in. When you're having those struggles with your relationship to money, which can emerge like the struggles we have with any other relationship in our lives, intrusive thoughts, anxiety, depression, avoidant attachment, anxious attachment, like whatever lenses listeners might be using to approach the relationships with other people in their lives. You can also look at your relationship with money and say like, oh, is that happening here? And then perhaps it sounds like a financial therapist could help if you want to unpack those. Although I'm also hearing you say like, find one who's a therapist first, maybe if that's your biggest goal, because some of the financial services first people may just be more like, great, let's look at your money first. Now let's talk about your feelings first.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's also just about finding right fit. And yeah, I do not push that vulnerability of like showing your numbers. The way a financial advisor would be like, well, send me all your numbers and then we'll talk about it. And like, I want to get to know the person. I want to have them verbalize about their money. I'm really noticing, like, it's interesting as a financial therapist, I'm noticing how my client is talking about the money. Like, that's more informative for me than like what their money is actually at, what levels and things like that. I mean, it's all important. It's all really important. So one of the things that I have found in my practice, the type of folks I attract and do my best work with are often millennials, not always, but mostly millennials, late diagnosed ADHD and autism or autism, neurodivergence for sure, and often with a experience of addiction in the past. So it's just really interesting. It's like, oh, wow, these themes keep coming up. And I don't have anywhere in my copy about like attracting these people, but there's something about that. I think these folks have been in therapy a lot, really appreciate that experience, really need that body doubling, that experience of being with somebody, and they're very visual thinkers. And then the addiction part has been my deep dive of 2023. I really hadn't done a lot of training in addiction in my graduate school, and I really got into it. I'm like, oh, wow, this is so here. Especially folks who, are actively sober, have gone through recovery, but found, oh, that addictive behavior transferred to money. So I'll say that like, that is where my interest lies. And I think there's so much more work to be done in that field. Money has such a high reward experience. It's also everywhere. We have to interact with it, has very addictive qualities. The other unspoken part about our money is class and how we were raised and the multi-generational experience with money. There's really something here in terms of intergenerational trauma, lessons. I mean, really, trauma is a way of transmitting information and lessons about safety. And so a topic I often get into is exploring what we know about our grandparents and great-grandparents, our people. Are there stories of migration? How are they impacted by war? Both of my parents were deeply impacted by World War II. And that really, like, my dad was like, never have a credit card. The Depression really impacted his family. So like, there's so much context and lessons about money that we learn from our family. And there's a lot of class identity too. Like, this is, I think, one of the aspects of my own under-earning is this, I'm putting in air quotes, we're poor but proud. And there are sometimes these family mantras that like, well, then if I pursue wealth, am I not part of my people anymore? And I think this is one of those things that like, oh, we haven't talked about it, but once we start talking about it, it's so there. That's so our lived experience. I find that class and family identity and culture in the greatest, intersectionality you can think of, really has the strongest weight on how we are viewing our money today.
That is so true of my experience. I'm like laughing because it hurts a little bit. I'm like, ugh. But, I don't think I shared this in the Overcoming Under-Earning episode, but what was contemporaneous with me doing all that money work was me moving from Chicago to Nebraska, which is where my family has lived for generations. And I have never lived here before, but my parents are both from here. And when I moved here, I was suddenly immersed in these multi-generational narratives in a way that I never had been, through like a much closer relationship with my grandmother, through a lot of genealogical research I was doing, and just uncovering this quite literally bone deep connection between hard work and worthiness that just lives so strongly in all these generations of my family on both sides. And it was actually kind of like that got me into the money work in a certain way. Or maybe I knew I was having money problems, but when I dug really deep, like that is the narrative that I'm still unraveling, still unpacking. And it's interesting to see that money is just like a proxy within that. Like money is not the thing people in my family have the complex about. It's the work and the worthiness. But money is what we see as indicative of that. It's like the symbolic of all of that. And so, that's just my personal experience. But I'm so intrigued that what you see in your work is working with a lot of people who are experiencing or living with neurodivergence, histories of addiction, like very much these sorts of like personal understandings of their psyche and how it works in their relationship to their experiences. And then also all of the family and intergenerational narratives that come up. And I think that both of those things take us right into therapy and then lead us right to our money issues. So
yeah. And I mean, you're right. Like money is neutral. Money is a way to, exchange for goods and services. It is an organizer. It's neutral, but it amplifies the issues. And, like that phrase, like follow the money. But like in my work, it's like, oh, you follow the money and you end up hearing what needs to be heard. Like you end up getting to the nugget of what needs to be actually explored. So like, people often come to me like, oh, I overspend, I'm a shopping addict, whatever. It's like, okay, that's what they come to me for. And we start unpacking it. But the journey is, how do I please myself? How do I satisfy myself? How can I adjust my money scripts while honoring my ancestors? It's like, it gets so deep. But that's where the lasting change happens, where you will not hear me say, you got to make a budget. You got to get strict with yourself. Like my approach is completely gentle and holistic because it's like an inside out approach. And then people end up like not only getting better with their money, but they end up trusting themselves. They end up rediscovering childhood hobbies. Like all this interesting stuff. They feel better in their body, right? It's like this ripple effect is so interesting to me. And that's why it's so important. It's like, it is about the money and it is so much bigger than the money.
I'm really hearing you say like healing our relationship with money can heal or support the healing of our relationship with self and plenty of other relationships in our lives. And that feels very related to something I say on this podcast often, which is like leaving social media is really about liberating ourselves from this like platform algorithmic system. And when we do that, we end up liberating ourselves from many other things in our lives. Like when we step away from this one thing that makes us feel really bad, it ripples into our ability to step away from other things that make us feel really bad. And it's like every time leaving is a form of healing, I think, can be in the case of social media. So I just am really hearing like all of this healing work that we may do with something that seems so inconsequential, like social media. You're like, yeah, of course I need to heal my intergenerational trauma, Amelia, but heal my relationship with social media? Like, who cares? But like, it matters.
Yeah, every no is actually a yes. Like, so we think about it like, oh, it's the no. Oh, I'm going to not buy lattes this week. Okay, fine. So what is the yes that's implicit in that? Like there's the opposite side. And so like with your platform, which I love, by the way, so much, it's like, okay, I'm going to leave that because it doesn't serve me because I'm going towards something. So, and even in like a micro thing, it's like, okay, you want to set a little challenge for yourself around spending. Great. Like that usually comes from my clients. I'm not going to suggest that, but what are we going towards? Oh, we're going towards feeling full in my body. Oh, I'm going towards reading more, like it almost always, whatever we go towards when we want to stop, a habit or whatever that doesn't serve us, it's like the ultimate self-care. We're always going towards self-care. So I try to focus on that. It's not so much what you're not doing, it's what you're going towards. It's always the best form of self-care we can find. And it's unique for everybody, right? I'm not going to say like the do yoga and light a candle unless that's your thing. It could be play more video games. I don't know like what it is for you, but we're going towards something.
Oh, absolutely. And this reminds me of an essay that I wrote related to a podcast episode I had heard, and we'll have to find and link in the show notes. But the argument of that episode was basically that budget culture is diet culture. And that really deeply resonated for me. And I've talked before on this show about how I think I was able to break up with social media because I actually broke up with diet culture before that, which felt like a much deeper, more radical shift in my life. And once I had that breakup, I was like, cool, I'm not really willing to settle for feeling bad in these other areas of my life now that I finally feel good in my body. And so that I could break up with social media and break up with budgeting. And I think what's so strong about those parallels is that budget culture and diet culture are both about restriction and deficit and saying no to yourself. And I love that reframe.
It's white patriarchy, it's puritanical, it's all of this stuff once you start looking at it. This like pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Like, when have you ever learned? Like, when have you ever grown and learned from that approach, that like highly restrictive approach? No. And so what I try to like express is like, we're actually going to plan for setbacks. That's part of the process. If you go through a setback, oh, I was doing so well with my budget, I was spending less, and then, you know, my cousin came to town or whatever, or I had a shit day and I had that fuck it moment and I bought a cruise or I, you know, bought that handbag. Everyone describes it the same as this fuck it moment. And it's like, oh, well, this is actually the diet cycle, the budget cycle, the addiction cycle, where we get really rigid with ourselves. It's never going to be the same, or I'm going to change all this. And then we can't hold that. It's not soft enough. It doesn't grow enough. It doesn't let us have a bad day. But what happens is when we can anticipate a shit day, a fuck it moment, but you observe it happening. Oh, this is the thing that Rachel told me might happen. And I'm going to love myself through it and be like, yeah, I had a shit day. What if I learn from it? So in addiction counseling, it's like, okay, we anticipate the quote relapse, but recovery means you learn from each cycle. You'll never step out of the cycle, but the cycle will get less intense. It will get less traumatic if you will learn from it each time. It won't turn out to be a straight line. It just won't, but you'll like spiral upwards.
Yes, absolutely. And this, you know, in my phrasing around the show is also how I think of energetic sovereignty. It's not about control. It's about our ability to surf the waves. The waves are going to keep coming. Sometimes they're going to be really big. Sometimes they're going to come from the inside. Sometimes they're going to come from the outside. And we're strengthening our ability to surf them no matter what the wave conditions are, and to recognize that we're going to wipe out sometimes. But like energetic sovereignty is not about controlling all the energy. It's not power over. It's about being with it all and being able to stay with yourself through it all, which is exactly what I'm hearing you describe.
And money work is boundary work. Like we talk about boundaries all the time, boundaries with yourself, social boundaries, all like the boundaries are endless. And I find boundaries to be like an unending topic that like I'm still totally exploring. And when I hear you say energetic sovereignty, that feels like healthy, flexible boundaries as well. I know where I end and you begin, and we can look at it and we can change it. And like, you know, it's not diffuse boundaries, but it's flexible boundaries, which I think is so important in life. And we really see that with money too. It's like, okay, I wasn't going to buy that avocado toast and then I wanted it. And am I going to just allow myself to do that because I want it and I am still a good person? And once you actually get in that place, you develop more mindfulness around how you are with money. And I think that speaks to what you're saying also, that I just feel like sovereignty also means like, I know there's like a knowing, there's a knowledge of what's going on. You're not avoiding topics or avoiding aspects of that.
Are you feeling fed up, burned out, or totally sick of social media? Are you wondering if your business might be able to be successful without it? Or if your creative work would still find its way out in the world without you posting it on Instagram or TikTok every 10 minutes? If you could relate to any of these musings of mine, I want to invite you to join me in the interweb. The Interweb is an annual membership for creatives, artists, small business owners, freelancers, influencers, entrepreneurs, and creators who want support sharing their work and making money without social media. When you join, you get access to on-demand courses taught by biz friends across the internet and quarterly live events with me, Amelia. If you love this podcast, I hope that you'll head to the show notes to learn more and sign up so that I really can see you off the grid and on the interweb. Now, let's get back into today's episode. So I want to transition us into this business owner specific part of the conversation. And I want to talk about setting rates and receiving money, because this is a really big challenge for a lot of business owners at every stage of business. And I'm curious for your perspective on the psycho-emotional aspects of this. So I'm not asking you how do you price your services? I'm asking you how do you actually get the gumption to charge for what you do and then let people pay you for it and then receive that money? Could you share a little bit about how we can support ourselves in that process?
Well, I'll say I'm right there with you. It's tough. It's a lot of my own work for sure. And I'll share just sort of my own process because that's sometimes all I can do. Coming from both an under-earning type of family system as well as being an admin assistant all through my 20s, I was always in this assisting role, very much, I think, similar to your story, being very grateful for the job, being told I was doing great work and I was so valuable, but that not equaling money, and people in positions of power in my life telling me that that was how it's supposed to be, and it's taken a lot to work through that. I'm still definitely working through that. In the pandemic, when I had to step away from my therapy practice, I have young children and I was had to be in a caregiving role, and I really missed therapy. And I missed being a therapist, I should say. I was in therapy myself, but I missed being a therapist. And I started to think about being a therapist is really good for me. So much of the training and how therapists come to be is it's in service of the client, you help the client. And that's a huge reason why we're there. But I actually can't do this work if it's not also for me. And being a therapist is good for me. I am part of this. And I don't know if this logic tracks for you. This is how it goes in my mind. Is that, okay, if therapy is essential for me as a person and I need to do this work, then I need to charge a rate that allows me to do the work. And I know that seems simple. For some reason, that was a revolution in my head. That I respect my client's sovereignty about what they can and cannot pay for the service, and that is okay. And I am not for everyone. But this is a transaction that needs to happen for me to do the work. If you believe in the work that I do, then this is what must happen for this work to exist. That started to click in for me in the pandemic. And then there's also some of the evidence. As business owners, we sometimes throw spaghetti on the wall. When I raise my rates, I got more clients. Because there is a communication that happens with rate setting, with pricing, that is about value. It's literally about value. People value the things that they pay more for. Now, granted, I think there's a ceiling. I don't think this means everyone should charge thousands of dollars an hour. I don't think that's not quite the point here. But it is actually about consent. And so I really live in this place of consent. Is that okay, as a business owner, I've kind of done the numbers. I gotta charge this for this business to exist. I would love for you to be part of it. It is an offer, but you have to consent to it. And so anytime you buy anything, we are consenting to this dollar amount being the thing that allows this thing to exchange. And I think it should always be about consent. So I've experimented with a lot of different things. I think that pricing psychology, there's a lot to it. And there's probably people who are more experts in it than I am. But there is a kind of energetic exchange when we pay for something. We are now connected in this way. It connects us. I think they call it don't they call it reciprocity bias? It's we've exchanged that thing, therefore we are connected now. So I take that really seriously. And I'm still playing with it. I got to say, I've sort of switched my services and my business model in 2024. I'm kind of thinking about switching it back. I don't know, because I'm trying to find the right match to help the most people as possible and help myself because it has to be good for me. So it's kind of a roundabout way of describing how I think of pricing. What do you think?
I really appreciate where you started, because you started in like the place of the artist, the place of the creator, which is like, yes, I do this work and it's a job, but like I do this job because I have to. Like part of me needs to be creating this. And for you, that is needs to be holding the conversations of therapy. Like maybe it's not a painting, but I still think that is a creative practice. Conversations are created and creative, I believe, as a podcaster. So I think that for people who are creators first, and this is like all you off the grid listeners out there, right? Maybe you don't think of yourself as an artist. Maybe you do. Maybe you're a writer. Maybe you're a creator. Maybe you're a podcaster. Maybe you're a therapist, any of these things, but like you are in the creative act in your business. Like it has to start from what is the thing that you love doing and you need to do. And that's going to be the what of your business, the service or the offering. But then like also for you to do that, you have to receive and return. And I think a lot of people get caught in that. They have not had that unlocking that you've had, and they're really struggling to even charge for their work. And then what happens is they undervalue it, and they're like, okay, I got to charge for this. So they like throw out a number that's like the least or the highest bit of their threshold, which is, maybe like $100. I see this a lot. I've done this. Believe me, I sell hours of my time for $100.
That's such an anchor point, $100. And it probably like felt the same 10, 20 years ago. And it should have shifted with inflation, but there's something about that. Also, 6 figures. The 6 figures is really cemented for us. I think it's very interesting. Yeah.
And that's personal and cultural, like you're saying. And so, but what happens, what I heard in your story is like, you might be deeply undervaluing your work when you only charge $100 for it. And then people will undervalue it in return. And something I've said on the show before is like, if you've been sharing your work, there are people in your audience or community who think you charge way too much and people who think you charge way too little. I would not go to a therapist who only charged me $20 a session. I would be like, what are we doing? The value wouldn't make sense to me. I also wouldn't go to a therapist who costs $20,000 a session because that value wouldn't make sense to me. And I just think that we have to, maybe to go back to where I started, there is this piece of like, we have to learn to charge for our work. We have to learn to value ourselves. This is where that financial therapy work, I'm sure, around worthiness really comes in. What are the narratives we're holding on to that we don't believe we could charge for our work? How do we unpack that so that when we even get to the moment of setting a rate, we're ready to value ourselves and ready to receive the information from our community and clients? Because that's the other thing. Like we can get up all that gumption to set our rates, but we also have to be ready to receive a yes or a no in response to that. And I think that's what keeps us often from putting the rate out there is like, if I had to do all this work to even charge whatever X dollar amount may be, and then nobody buys it, that can be a real wound to our worthiness. And I've witnessed this with clients, and it's really hard to keep going in those moments where we feel rejected and wounded by our business, by our community in that way.
Mm-hmm. Or what I'm reflecting on myself is I think I'm at the point where I have exhausted my organic community, where I had a lot of early wins, which was great. Like once I said I was a financial therapist, it was like people came in knocking. I was like, oh my gosh. And it's great. But like now a couple years in, like I've reached all those people I was going to reach. They've worked with me. They've gone on. They're doing great because I'm good at my job. And I'm like, oh, is this rejection or is this, I actually need to continue my reach? That like that initial audience was already warmed up and the ones who are going to buy bought. And I'm literally right now, like really trying to understand this and looking at reach and things like that. The other thing I'll say on just a really practical level, I have a visualization of like the build hour as like a pie graph that like, I think we confuse wage with build hour. And that like, okay, if I charge someone $100 for my hour, like a slice of that is my wage. There's a slice for taxes. There's a slice for expenses. There's a slice for my time off. There's a slice for all of the training that I do for that hour because no one is billing 40 hours a week. You're maybe billing for therapists, usually around 10 to 20 hours a week. So like you can't confuse that with your wage because you can't earn that for 40 times a week. So you do need to think of it as a unit of service, like a unit of experience that supports you. Again, this is like, oh, this has to be good for me. This supports me going to that conference. This supports me reading. This supports me with my self-care, because self-care is actually an ethical mandate for therapists. And I would say for artists as well, is like, you don't do good work if you're burned out. So actually, that is part of the service, is you not being burned out. So you need to be able to charge the amount that allows for you to be really good at your work and not be burned out. And it's going to be more than $100 an hour. You're right. That's such an important anchor point. And maybe that is a reach for folks, but that I would say is bare minimum for just like modern life right now.
And I think this is where like we can bring that spirit of like play and self-care and creativity into playing with these numbers and understanding what they are. And then our role as business owners is, once we have that number of this is what I need to charge per hour, or this is what I need to charge per session, or this is what I need to make per month, then we get to kind of invent the offerings that we think can do that and go find the people that can afford to pay that. So the other place I really see a mismatch around setting rates and receiving money is that sometimes, especially if we're under earners, I speak from experience here, we may have embedded ourselves in a community of other under earners, which means that when we try to actually like set a rate that can support us, none of those people are showing up to pay it because they either quite literally can't afford it or they feel they can't afford it, which I think are often different things. And so it may be that a part of our work is going to find the people and cultivating at least a business relationship with communities that can afford this work in their own conception of what affording means, which again, I think is way more than just the numbers in the bank. It has a lot more to do with perceived value and relationship with money and self and all of this. And so that's like another piece of this. And so like when we figure out what that supportive rate is, we have to cultivate the capacity to receive that much money, and we have to find the people who have the capacity to pay that much money. And that can all be really challenging. And then on top of that, you get to your situation where I'm really hearing of like, business has been going great because you seem to me like someone who had already brought a big community into this. And so you had years of just working for that community you already had. And then it's like, okay, what's next? And I do see this as well with more as we like, to me, that's the transition into being like a mid-stage business owner, like early stage, which can be years and years for some people. Like you're just working with that community you already knew. I think moving into mid-stage is really like proving that this has value to people that I have not met and that I'm able to bridge that gap. And for some people, that happens really fast. And for others who have these more service-based relational businesses, I think it can take longer because we've always been embedded in community. We're able to sell our stuff to the people we know. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what's next?
All those people bought.
Yeah. Now where did they go? It's kind of like my business coach and friend, Jessica Lackey, always reminds me that it's the same thing happens. Like when you sell a course for the first time, you might sell it out, especially if you've got like a mailing list that you've never sold a course to before. But then when you go sell it for the second time, you might not sell a single one because all the people who were going to buy just bought. And now you actually need like way more new people to fill your course a second time. And so that dynamic happens in our businesses. And
it's great. And you want to be giving a great service, right? You want the people who to buy from you, who, engage in whatever you've got, to be really satisfied. And sometimes you do such a good job. Like I have a friend who's just a really, really gifted trauma therapist. And she's like, I just keep healing my clients. Like they work with me for 2 or 3 months and they go on and they're so good. And so it's like, okay, if you know that like your service is like that, and I'm kind of like that too, like maybe an intensive for a few months and then some maintenance after that. Oh, then that means I have to be meeting X amount of new people every month. And that is kind of like, that starts to get a little mind blowing, and you have to get really creative about like, okay, it's not the product, it's the reach. It's the reach.
And what I'm hearing you say is like, you have to diagnose that correctly because you may think like, oh, it's my service that's the problem. Oh, it's my pricing that's the problem. But actually, it is that reach. It's how are you bringing new people into your ecosystem over and over again to keep doing this work for the long term.
And I think those business owners, we're way more obsessed with the price than our customers are.
I co-sign that.
Yeah, I've had people join the club who are like, all I saw was Money Healing Club and I bought. They didn't read my website. They didn't look at my stuff. I am on social media, but they're just like, all I saw was Money Healing Club. Yep. Like, I'll pay anything for that. So I think we get a little obsessive about that. I don't think the clients care so much. There's a range there, but if you really need that person's help, you're just be like, whatever, sign. They don't care about that as much as we do.
100%. I mean, and that's part of why pain point marketing is so effective, is because if someone is actually in pain, I'm not here to say, generate false pain points, nor am I here to say exploit people who are in pain. But when you do find yourself in pain, you're pretty willing to pay for and try whatever you think will really support you and heal you. And that work is really valuable. And that's why it costs money. So you very generously offered to close us out with a visualization. So I was hoping we could take our last 5 to 10 minutes to kind of experience that together, I guess, for you to guide me in it and by proxy guide the listeners in it, and then wrap up our conversation. Can we go there now?
I would love it. Let's get into it. Okay. So if I were doing this in a session, I would probably have someone make an image. And so listeners are welcome to do that. But just so we don't have loads of silent time, I'm just going to have you sort of verbally process with me. I'm going to give you a prompt. And it's going to sort of wake up the right side of your brain, which is the intuitive image processing part of your brain. And it's the part that's running all the time, but it's often quiet. And the left side of our brain, the more verbal, analytical stuff, that is much louder usually. But we're going to quiet that down and listen to the other side of the brain. I'm going to give you a prompt. And I want you to notice the first thing that comes up, and without analyzing it and without editing it. So if we were sitting down in session, I would have you make this image and we'd have kind of a few minutes of silent time for you to work on it, just so you know, the normal setting. All right, Amelia, are you ready? Take a breath. Kind of get a little quiet. Where I want you to imagine your money as a creature. It can be a real or imagined creature.
Okay, I'm imagining a koala bear. That's what came up.
A koala bear. Yeah. Yep. It's never wrong. It's never wrong. All right. So as you have this image forming in your mind, it might already be taking some shape. What just do you notice about this image? What maybe something about any sensations you have? Surprises? What is it like to have this image come up for you?
It feels very joyful, a little silly. I think koala bears are very cute and very silly looking creatures. It's like eating a lot of leaves. It won't stop eating.
Okay, but it was eating.
Yes. Hanging out on the tree, eating the leaves, just crunching on those twigs. And I just feel like I have a smile on my face. I feel just happy to witness it.
You're happy to witness it. Yeah. All right. Now, as you have this image in your head, and if people are listening, if you've drawn an image, that's even better. What does this creature need right now to feel complete? This could be in addition to its environment. It could be something for it to work with. It could be some kind of change. And ask it. You can ask it. What do you need to feel complete, koala bear?
I think it's really emanating a deep sense of satisfaction. It feels like it has what it needs as long as there are leaves on this tree.
And after having asked it what it needed and it responded to you, are there any changes you've noticed about the image, about the creature, about you?
I've noticed that the image keeps fluctuating between abundance of leaves, scarcity of leaves. It's flickering in and out. I feel like I don't trust that there are plenty of leaves on the tree. That's a me thing. I feel like koala bears chill.
You don't trust, but the koala does. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Really good to notice that, right? That like this image, it's not just the koala, it's the leaves, it's the environment, it's the thing that it's consuming. And the koala trusts.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Yeah. The koala is, we said, joyful, content, filled. There's something about you observing it that had that there's a dynamic there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What wisdom does this image have for you?
The first thing that's coming to mind, I'm giggling because it's silly, but the first thing that came to mind was I was like, oh, I need to be the koala I wish to see in the world. But, not to like misappropriate Gandhi's wisdom or something, but kind of to do that. I think that what I'm seeing is like when embedded in its home environment, the koala has plenty and is happy. And I have trouble trusting that the environment will provide, trusting that like being in the right place, the place where I'm meant to be, the place where the koala is meant to be. I don't really trust it. So I think that that's the wisdom I'm taking away it's almost like, and I think this is very much a corollary to my experience of money and particularly making money in softer sounds. Like I'm witnessing the evidence that it's working. I have trouble trusting that it will stay. And that's where I'm at in my current money journey and money work as well, is I've gotten in touch with what's enough. I see the evidence that I have it and can experience it. I've felt that deep satisfaction, but I like slip out of it sometimes. I don't trust it. And it's like I jump out of I like dissociate a little bit, like outside of myself, looking at myself, and I'm scared and I don't trust. And that's the same with me looking at the koala, I think.
Well, and here's the thing, you don't have to be this creature. This creature is a thing you are in relationship with, and it has wisdom for you. Often when we ask money what we should know from it, it's often this very steady, compassionate, boundaried response that like, I'm here for you. Like almost always when I do this exercise with folks, there's this like, I'm here for you. I'm here to serve you in some way or another. It's very compassionate. It's also very boundaried. Like when I've really unpacked this exercise with people, it's like, oh, money also has an opinion. It's not like it's unopinionated. But it's, it's actually, it wants really good things for us. And that's the relationship. And that you might forget. You might not trust it. That's okay. Money's like, that's okay. But it has a spirit to it that I think is really important to relate to. And as I'll say, this exercise changes every time I do it. I have a new creature that comes to my mind. It's been everything from a dragon to a rat. So it's also like where you're at this moment, and this is the way. It's such good information, such good intuitive information. I have yet to encounter someone who has trouble with this exercise. And I would leave it at that. And for you to take the wisdom from this, for you to also let the image kind of do its work. Like often it kind of lingers, let yourself dream on it, and it might start changing as you notice it. And it's a really cool process.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Rachel. I can't wait to dream of my money koala. Seems like a cool symbolic image to work with to let my subconscious unravel. Well, thank you again for this entire conversation, for sharing this visualization, for guiding me through it. I hope listeners can rewind and pause and move through it on their own. For the many folks who I am sure want to work with you now, could you just tell them how they can work with you and where they can find you online?
So moneyhealingclub.com is where everything lives. I'm on TikTok and Instagram at Money Healing Club. And come to my website, though, for my free 7-day mindful spending challenge, where you get 7 lovingly crafted mindfulness prompts every day. And it ends in a workshop and a webinar that is some of my best work. And I really can guarantee this is a talk about money that is not usually out there. It's very compassionate, it's very gentle, but very effective.
Beautiful. Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes as well. And beautiful listeners, I hope this conversation has served you and supported you in continuing along your money journeys and your money healing journeys specifically. And I hope that you'll check out Rachel's work. And yeah, just thank you, Rachel. Thank you, listeners. Until next time, I will see you all off the grid and on the interweb. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really